The fall of Lila Blackwood. The crowd gathered in the central square of Crackthor was as cold as the gray, barren planet they stood on. The air smelled of metal, oil, and ash, a constant reminder of the Galactic Empire's iron grip on this forsaken world. Above them, the dark sky stretched endlessly, punctuated only by the occasional hum of Imperial transports. It was a world built for suffering, where justice had no name and mercy no place. Lila Blackwood stood on the execution platform, shackled and defiant, her back straight despite the chains biting into her wrists. She looked out across the sea of unfamiliar faces, alien species, soldiers, citizens, those who had come to witness the end of her life. To them, she was no one, just another traitor to the Empire. But they had no idea who she was. No idea what her death would mean. A grim figure in a black uniform approached, carrying the gleaming executioner's blade. His face was hidden beneath a polished mask, and his presence exuded an impersonal coldness that matched the world around them. He raised the blade, ready to strike, but Lila spoke before he could bring it down. "Do you even know who I am?" she asked, her voice strong, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The executioner didn't flinch. "A traitor. A rebel." Lila shook her head, her lips curling into a faint smile, bitter but resolute. "You're wrong." There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet acceptance. She knew she wasn't going to make it off this platform. But her last words would echo in the minds of the people in the square. The executioner's hand wavered, his mask betraying no emotion. He waited for his orders from Lord Parnock Thrail, the Imperial commander overseeing this public service. From his position, a few hundred meters away, Thrail watched without emotion. He was a man who had seen countless executions, each one a small victory for the Empire. A deep voice rang out from behind the executioner. "Stop!" Lord Parnock Thrail stepped into view, his silhouette sharp against the steel backdrop of the platform. He was tall, thin, his uniform immaculate, like a piece of perfectly polished machinery. He had the air of a man who had never been challenged, until now. "You've made your point," he said, addressing the executioner. His voice was cold and unwavering. "Let her speak. Her words will be meaningless in the end." The crowd remained silent, waiting for the next move. Lila's gaze never wavered from Thrail as he approached. "You think I'm just another casualty," she began, her voice carrying through the square with surprising clarity. "Just another traitor to dispose of." She spat the word with contempt. "But you don't understand. You don't know what you've done." Thrail tilted his head, amused. "What are you implying, woman?" Lila smiled again, this time with more bitterness. "You've killed me, yes. But you've only made him stronger. You've made him rage." Her voice dropped, becoming colder, more dangerous. "You've made him a force you can't stop." Thrail frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing his otherwise expressionless face. "Who?" Lila didn't answer. Instead, she stared at him, her eyes filled with something far more powerful than fear. "Your empire is weak," she said quietly, "and you've just awakened something that will tear it apart." The Imperial commander's frown deepened. "You talk as if your death means something." Lila's lips tightened. "You'll find out soon enough." The executioner stepped forward, his hand raising once more, but Lord Parnock held up a hand. He turned to the crowd, who had remained eerily silent throughout the exchange. "Make no mistake, citizens of Crackthor," Thrail declared, his voice booming over the speakers. "This woman was a threat to the stability of the Empire. Her death is a necessary sacrifice for the good of the galaxy. Let this be a warning." Lila's eyes never left him. She didn't flinch when the executioner brought the blade down. The moment the steel touched her throat, her life was extinguished. She fell limp, her blood spilling onto the cold platform, staining the metal beneath her. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The crowd stood still, their faces unreadable, their expressions hollow. To them, it was over. The Empire had triumphed. Another traitor eradicated. Another rebel crushed. But in the shadows, unseen by the crowd, something else was stirring. Something the Empire couldn't predict. Lord Parnock Thrail turned away, his gaze still hard, unyielding. Dispose of the body. Let's move on, he ordered, dismissing the scene with a wave of his hand. There was no reverence for the life lost, no acknowledgement of the woman who had stood defiant in the face of death. In the Empire's eyes, Lila Blackwood was nothing more than an inconvenience. Far across the galaxy, aboard a ship that was little more than a shadow against the void, General Nathan Blackwood stood alone in his quarters. He had received the transmission. The message. Lila's death. The pain was immediate, a searing, gut-wrenching ache that threatened to tear him apart. He clenched his fists, the knuckles white, his jaw tight as he fought to maintain control. She didn't deserve this, he muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse. His fingers hovered over the controls of his terminal, the very device that had sent him into this dark spiral. A message from the Resistance. Lila was dead. Killed by the Empire. The rage surged in his chest like wildfire. He stood there, motionless for a moment, staring at the empty space before him. It was over. Or it was about to be. Now, he said, the word a promise, a vow. Now, it begins. Nathan Blackwood, General of the United Earth Forces, once a man of war, now a man consumed by vengeance, hit a series of commands into his terminal. Across the galaxy, hidden in the depths of uncharted systems, the scattered remnants of humanity's resistance forces would be mobilized. But this wasn't just about resistance. This was about an unstoppable storm. This was about a reckoning that the Empire had no way of avoiding. The day had come. The day of vengeance. And the Empire would never see it coming. The storm hit first as an uneasy rumble in the distance, barely perceptible at first, like the low growl of a predator stalking its prey. But soon, that subtle tremor grew into something far more menacing. The winds picked up, battering the fragile hull of the ship, as though the very universe were preparing itself for the chaos to come. On board the Vanguard, a dimly lit command ship now cutting through the darkness of space, General Nathan Blackwood stood in front of a vast screen, his silhouette stark against the flickering map of star systems. His fingers traced the holographic projection of the galaxy, his territory, his battlefield. A war had begun, and he wasn't waiting for permission. He wasn't going to ask. He was going to make them listen. Get me a comm link to every resistance cell, he commanded, his voice low, steely. The words didn't come with hesitation or doubt. They were orders. Final, deliberate. The crew moved quickly to comply, but Nathan's mind was already racing ahead, calculating, planning. Lila's death had changed everything. And with it, his entire focus. His war, his campaign, had just taken a far more personal turn. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for vengeance. The screen flickered as the communications officer's voice broke through. General, we have contact with Alpha, Beta, and Theta squads. Ready for orders. Nathan turned toward the officer. Good. Send the signal. I want them all in motion. It's time we show the Empire that they've made a grave mistake. The officer hesitated for a moment, but only for a second. Understood, sir. Sending now. The Vanguard shuddered as the message went out, across light years, to scattered resistance forces hidden deep within the outer rims. The Empire might have crushed rebellions before, but they had never faced an enemy like this. Blackwood wasn't just a man, they were about to discover that he was a symbol. A storm they had unwittingly created. Nathan's sharp gaze shifted toward the tactical map. The Empire was spread thin, scattered across countless worlds, unaware that the fires of war were already being stoked. His strategy was simple: hit hard, hit fast, and make them bleed. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, on a remote Imperial installation, Lieutenant Marnak watched the small feed on his monitor, brow furrowed. His task was simple: oversee routine security checks and ensure the ongoing suppression of local uprisings. But something was wrong. The data streams were flooding in from every corner of the Empire: disturbances, anomalies, strange signals. The Empire's surveillance network was designed to detect any signs of rebellion, any hint of insurrection. And yet, there was a growing silence. A subtle shift in the air. It was as though every intelligence feed was being rerouted, manipulated. Before he could react, his superior, Commander Alara, appeared beside him, her cold eyes scanning the same stream of troubling data. "Lieutenant," she said with an edge of irritation. "What is this?" "Report." Marnak quickly tapped at the console, trying to make sense of the growing irregularities. "It's the resistance cells, Commander. They're coordinating across multiple sectors." Alara's face darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You're sure?" "I've never seen anything like this before," Marnak muttered, his fingers flying across the controls. "They're not operating independently. Someone's orchestrating this." Alara's gaze shifted toward the window, as if looking out into the very void of space itself. A silence stretched between them before she finally spoke. "It's him." Marnak's eyes widened. "Blackwood." Commander Alara nodded slowly. "If Blackwood is behind this, then we have a real problem. The humans, they're not just coordinating. They're planning an uprising. A calculated one. It's more than a simple resistance now." Marnak felt a cold shiver race down his spine. "Then what do we do?" Alara's eyes hardened. "We take action. Immediately. We shut this down, before it escalates." Back aboard the Vanguard, Nathan stood in the heart of his command center, observing the immediate results of his actions. Across his fleet of ships, the resistance forces mobilized, their ships jumping into hyperspace, poised to strike at the Empire's weak points. Nathan's plan was already in motion, but even as he saw the first wave of resistance ships launching from hidden bases, something gnawed at him. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for survival, it had become a war for freedom. For his wife. For justice. He turned to his second-in-command, Captain Orla Vance. She had been with him through thick and thin, and like him, she understood the stakes. "We have to be quick," he said, his tone sharp. "We hit them where they least expect it. No warnings. No time for negotiation." Orla nodded, her expression unreadable. "I've already begun rerouting forces. The Empire won't know what hit them." Nathan's eyes burned with determination. "Good. We're going to make sure they understand the price of what they did." In the heart of the Imperial fleet, Lord Parnock Thrail stood in the command center of the flagship Indomitable, a massive warship that had seen countless battles and crushed rebellions without mercy. His fingers tapped steadily on the arm of his chair as he observed the intelligence reports coming in from every sector. His calm was shattered when a report flashed across his screen: unusual activity detected. Multiple resistance cells mobilizing. Possible coordination. The cold feeling of realization hit him like a jolt of ice water. He immediately summoned his officers to the war room. They all knew what this meant. A major human rebellion, led by none other than Nathan Blackwood himself. The one general the Empire had never truly been able to break. "We need to act, and we need to act now," Thrail declared, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "The human general is rallying forces. We will not let this uprising gain any traction." The officers scrambled to their stations, issuing orders with the urgency of men who knew the threat was real. But even as Thrail prepared for what was to come, a small, gnawing doubt began to creep into his mind. Had they underestimated Blackwood? Back on the Vanguard, Nathan's eyes narrowed as the first reports of Imperial resistance came through. He'd expected this, an immediate crackdown. But it didn't matter. The Empire had always underestimated humanity's resilience, its drive to survive. The war for Lila had only just begun. And this time, there would be no mercy. The Empire strikes back. The quiet hum of the Vanguard was interrupted by a shrill alarm. The atmosphere within the command center shifted instantly from focused anticipation to urgent action. Nathan Blackwood's face, typically calm and composed, betrayed a flicker of tension as he stepped toward the tactical map. "Sir, multiple Imperial warships have entered the system," Captain Orla Vance reported, her voice steady, but sharp with the tension of the moment. She didn't need to look up to know that the situation had just escalated. "They've locked down the outer perimeter. They're readying their forces." Nathan's gaze hardened. The Empire had reacted faster than expected, but it didn't matter. He'd been planning for this very moment. The Empire would never predict the strike that was coming. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice unyielding. "We're going to hit them harder than they can react." Orla's fingers flew over her console. "All ships are ready, General. The first wave of resistance cells is positioned as planned." Nathan turned back to the map, where several points of light indicated the locations of the newly rallied resistance forces. Small, precise, and dangerous, they were moving toward Imperial assets, like a swarm of wasps targeting the Empire's weakest points. But that wasn't where the real battle would be fought. "It's time to send a signal," Nathan said. "Launch the diversion." Orla nodded. Initiating. In the darkness of space, far beyond the Imperial fleet's grasp, a fleet of blacked-out vessels, designed to blend seamlessly into the void, prepared to make their move. They were the diversion, mere shadows meant to confuse and scatter the Imperial forces. Their goal was simple: draw the Empire's attention long enough for Nathan's true strike to land. The vessels, led by the Nightshade, a ghost ship that could disappear and reappear at will, disappeared into hyperspace, reappearing just outside Imperial sensors. A wave of attacks followed, hurling laser fire and EMP bursts toward the enemy warships. It was a precise, calculated strike, meant to create chaos, but not to kill. Yet, back aboard the Indomitable, the flagship of Lord Parnok Thrail, the Imperial Command Center was alive with activity. A crimson alert blared, cutting through the tension-filled silence. Multiple hostile targets engaged in Sector 7, an officer shouted. "They're using cloaking tech, we can't lock on." Thrail stood, his face like stone, calculating the sudden, unexpected assault. He had anticipated this. The resistance, always elusive, always unpredictable. But there was one thing he didn't expect: the audacity of their plan. The Empire had never been made to feel this vulnerable. "Redirect all available interceptors to Sector 7, Thrail commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Activate countermeasures. Find those ships, now." But in the chaos, there was something missing. Something deeper. A cold dread that crawled under Thrail's skin. This attack was only the beginning. The true test was yet to come. Back aboard the Vanguard, Nathan's expression was unreadable as he watched the unfolding chaos on the screen. The diversion was working. The Empire was scrambling, unsure of where to send their forces. As expected. But Nathan's eyes didn't stay on the map for long. He turned to Orla. "Now we strike." Orla's fingers flew over the console. "All ships, deploy at Point A, get in position for the main attack." The command was simple. It was direct. And the force that Nathan had assembled, bolstered by hardened soldiers and military tacticians, was ready. The final phase of the operation had arrived. Nathan's hand hovered over the communicator. "This is General Blackwood. All resistance ships, move in. Disrupt the Empire. Don't let them recover. It's time to show them what happens when they push humanity too far." The Vanguard shuddered as its engines roared to life, streaking through space like a blade cut through the night. At Nathan's signal, the resistance fleet surged forward in a wave, coordinated perfectly, no hesitation, no time wasted. The Imperial fleet, still in disarray from the initial strike, was now being hit on multiple fronts. Small, precise attacks crippled their communication lines, while larger ships targeted their most critical assets. An Imperial destroyer, a massive ship that had once been the pride of their fleet, found itself under attack by 3 resistance ships at once. The Empire's response was chaotic at best, with small interceptor fighters scrambling to form a defensive perimeter. "We've got them on the back foot," Orla said, her voice strained but satisfied. "Their command is compromised." Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. This is only the beginning. Hit them where it hurts. Every victory will weaken them. Let them know that we won't stop. Back on the Indomitable, Thrail was beginning to realize the full scope of the attack. The resistance had escalated faster than anticipated, and the Empire was struggling to maintain its superiority. His officers were scrambling to regain control, but their responses were scattered. And each time they moved to one sector, they were hit in another. The human rebels, led by Nathan Blackwood, were relentless. "Commander," one of Thrail's officers said, her voice tight. "We've detected a fleet on a direct course for the capital planet." Thrail's heart sank. "The Vanguard. They've found our weak point," Thrail muttered, cursing under his breath. "Activate all planetary defenses. Prepare for impact." Nathan stood at the helm of the Vanguard, his heart pounding with the thrill of the battle. But there was no time to revel in the moment. He had one shot at this. The Imperial capital was within reach. "Activate the main guns," he commanded. "Target their planetary shield generators. Disable them, and we can end this fight now." Orla's fingers moved rapidly across her console. "Main guns charging. Ready to fire on your mark." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he watched the planetary shields flicker in and out, struggling to stay intact under the onslaught. Every shot fired from the Vanguard struck true, shattering defenses that had once been considered impenetrable. "It's working," Orla said, her voice filled with awe. "We're breaking their shield." Nathan didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the slowly dimming shield of the Imperial capital. The endgame was approaching. But there was still one thing left to do. His finger hovered above the command button. "This is for Lila," he whispered. Then, without hesitation, he pressed the button. The Vanguard's main guns fired. And with that, the Empire began to tremble. The first volley hit the shield generators, sending shockwaves throughout the planet. The once impenetrable defenses crumbled, and for the first time in years, the Empire knew what it felt like to fear the storm of humanity's wrath. Nathan Blackwood had only just begun.